Hello, I'm Gregory Sweet with Skagit Talks, and my special guest today is Laura Blackmore with Puget Sound Partnership. Laura, welcome to Skagit Talks.
Thanks so much for having me, Gregory. I'm really happy to be here.
We got an information bulletin recently on your action agenda that's coming up, and I wondered a little bit if you could tell us about what Puget Sound Partnership really is. Is it a federal, a quasi-federal, a state agency, a partnership of, you know, uh, public-private? Tell me a little bit about that, please.
Sure. Thanks, Gregory. We are a small state agency focused on recovering Puget Sound and its salmon to health. We're created by the Washington State Legislature. We're also part of the National Estuary Program under the Clean Water Act at the federal level. So we work with EPA and hundreds of partners to figure out how to restore Puget Sound and its salmon to health. And about half of our funding comes from the state, and the other half comes from the federal government, primarily via EPA. But again, we do work, as our name suggests, with dozens, if not hundreds, of organizations to try to achieve our mission.
Tell me, what is that mission?
Our mission is to restore Puget Sound and its salmon to health.
Great. I saw that the EPA had approved your action agenda from 2022 to 2026 on August 4th. How does this differ, uh, Laura, from what was the previous action agenda that was in place?
Well, great question. So the action agenda is our action plan, which guides recovery for 4 years. And Washington state law requires us to update it every 4 years. So this is the latest iteration. And we developed it with hundreds of partners and focused it on five key outcomes: protecting and restoring habitat and habitat forming processes, protecting and improving water quality, protecting the food web and imperiled species like salmon and orcas, preventing the worst effects of climate change, and ensuring human well-being. And this version of the action agenda is much more streamlined than in the previous versions. We keep learning how to focus it and make it simpler. We also learned last time that a lot changes even in 4 years. And so we have this time provided examples of the kinds of actions that we think would be most effective for Puget Sound recovery, rather than creating a big list of specific actions for folks. And so we hope that this plan will provide guidance to our partners as they work to achieve recovery goals, without limiting them too much to the specifics that, by the end of 4 years are now 4 years old. And then the program targets are also new. We worked with our sister state agencies to help them set stretch goals for what they can accomplish over the next 4 years. And it's our hope that this will drive them to greater action. We will work with them to help support them in their implementation, hold them accountable, and try to remove any barriers that they might encounter. So that's what's new.
Tell me also, are you in partnership with our indigenous populations, the tribals that are around, and are they in support of your program?
We do work very, very closely with Puget Sound tribes. And we work with many of them to develop this action agenda in a variety of ways, right? They work at the local scale, so the Skagit watershed scale. They also help us at the regional scale to set priorities. So they've contributed in many, many different ways. And the partnership under state law is also responsible for salmon recovery in Puget Sound. And so our action agenda has a really strong focus on returning salmon to our rivers. It also has a strong focus on protecting and restoring shellfish beds, and basically restoring this place that we care about so much to health. And so to the extent that that helps the tribes achieve their goals, I believe, yes, that they are in partnership with us and supportive.
Excellent. I was reading an article just recently that said that the salmon population is very supportive of the orcas and the dwindling amount of salmon that are coming down through the rivers in the Puget Sound as well as all up and down the Pacific Northwest, are having quite a ill effect on the orca population.
That's correct. Yes. Our southern resident orcas, which are the ones that you hear about in the news all the time and we hope to see in Puget Sound, uh, are 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 the food snobs of the whale world, is what I like to say. They really like to eat. They can only eat salmon, and their preference, because they're smart, is for Chinook salmon, right? The king salmon that we all love, also. And so the fact that our Chinook salmon are on the endangered species list means that there's not enough of those salmon for the orcas to eat. And then also we know that over the last few decades, the size of Chinook salmon has been shrinking also. So the whales are working harder to catch fewer fish that are also smaller. So we're making their lives hard. So yes, the best thing we can do for our orcas, our beloved orcas, is to restore salmon to robust levels.
I want to point out, too, that our listeners can get more information about Puget Sound Partnership by going to your website, which is www.psp.wa.gov, and they can actually download a PDF for the Puget Sound recovery, which covers some of the topics that we're talking about here today. I found that very interesting to look through.
Great. That's wonderful to hear. Thanks, Gregory. Yes. And I would encourage folks, if you're there, to check out our Action Agenda Explorer. So if you're the kind of person that likes to dig into a website and click through, the Action Agenda Explorer is actually a really great interactive tool to learn more about our plan. So I would encourage whatever works best for you. The PDF is great, and the Action Agenda Explorer also great. So.
I noticed in that action agenda that what you're doing is charting the course for Puget Sound recovery, um, guides funding and policy decisions. And the third thing that's pointed out in there is that you ensure accountability. When I read that, based on my previous career, it sounded to me like what PSP is basically a project manager, if you will.
Yes, that's an interesting description. And what we usually say is that we serve in a backbone role, right? So we're a tiny state agency. There's only about 55 of us now. So we can't do all the work of recovery. We rely on our partners to get that work done. And so we do three things. We chart the course to recovery, like you said. That's our action agenda and our salmon recovery plan, right? That sets out the course. We also manage a system of shared measurements. So those are our vital signs and indicators and targets. And that's the accountability piece, right? Where it's where we track progress, figure out what's going on out there so we can adjust our plans accordingly. And then we support our partners in a variety of ways because they're really doing the hard work of recovery. And that is anything from going to Washington, D.C. and encouraging our delegation to make sure there's plenty of funding for Puget Sound, to working to remove red tape at the state level, for example, is something we're working on with some of our local partners right now. Any barrier that's coming up for them that prevents them from being able to do their work effectively and efficiently, we want to know about that. So if there's a way we can help, we will.
This reminds me, as I said, so much of my background in project management, and I used to teach courses on this. And what I like to compare this to is a wheel with spokes on it. And the hub of that wheel is the project management. And that's how I kind of see Puget Sound Partnership, is that information goes in and information goes out to a central point so that it doesn't just fade off into never never land and not get the work done. I always like to say that on time and within budget. That's the keys to project management. And it seems to me like the accountability of this is so important to you, especially when you have budgets that you have to stay within, and they're never enough, as we know. This has got to be the challenge for your work as the executive director of PSP.
It is. I agree. And you're right. Yes, I love the image of us as the hub of the wheel. That's exactly right. We try to stay in the center and manage everything or help understand everything that's going on out there, which is a huge, complicated ecosystem of people and organizations. The accountability piece is a challenge. So we set targets at the Puget Sound scale for where we want to be. What does recovery look like? And then we try to track that to see how we're doing. The interesting thing is that we can publish that information, but we as a state agency are unusual in that we do not have regulatory authority and we don't actually manage a lot of money. So we don't have two of the typical tools to encourage people to do the right thing. So for us, it's really about relationships and providing information and encouraging people to live up to the goals that we have set for ourselves.
You hit on a word that is really near and dear to me, and that's relationships. In real estate, we used to say location, 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 but the truth of the matter is that the most important thing is relationships, relationships, relationships. And if you're not good at building those and sustaining them, it gets very hard to meet that goal as a project manager.
Yes, indeed. I could not agree more.
I know that you have a comprehensive plan and an implementation plan. The comprehensive plan is your long term vision, but the
Mm-hmm.
implementation plan I saw on your website is 31 strategies, 137 actions, and 11 program targets. This must be a big job putting this all together.
It is indeed. And I would love to give a shout out to my team that works incredibly hard. We have a fantastic team of folks that is in charge of putting the action agenda together, right? They're the hub and the center of that particular wheel. And then we work with hundreds of partners. We build those relationships to try to understand what are the priorities in every watershed around Puget Sound, right? There are 16 major rivers in Puget Sound. What do we need to do for each of those rivers? And so pulling all of that information together into a document that is still readable is an enormous challenge. And I think my team did a fabulous job, and I'm very, very proud.
Excellent. I also wanted to ask you about something that also jumped out at me was the Puget Sound Acquisition and Restoration, PSAR. My former background for over 4 decades was in land acquisition and permitting of federal, state, and local projects. Tell me just briefly, if you could, a little bit about how that works. Are you acquiring actual real estate, or are you? Tell me how that works.
Sure. The PSAR program is incredibly important. It's a grant program funded by the Washington State Legislature that is focused on salmon recovery projects. And so what we do is work with our partners to figure out which projects we want to propose for that funding source, and then work with the governor's office to get that into the governor's budget. He works with the legislature to get the legislature to fund it, and then we make sure that the funding goes to the right to those projects. We fund down a ranked list, and so the agency itself, we don't manage the projects ourselves. Our partners do. We just manage the grant process.
One last question for you, Laura. I wanted to ask you how your organization affects people in Skagit County, and more so, how can they help you?
Great question. So I think that if we actually achieve our goal of restoring Puget Sound to health, that helps everyone in Skagit County. We'd have clean water, more salmon, fewer floods, more shellfish, viable agriculture, timberlands, and plenty of places to connect with nature. But how they can help is they can get involved locally with groups that are working directly on Puget Sound recovery, such as the Skagit Watershed Council, the Skagit Conservation District, or the Skagit Fisheries Enhancement Group, and vote. Tell your elected officials at every level, local, state, federal, that Puget Sound and salmon recovery are important to you.
Perfect.
Yes.
Laura, thank you so
But
much for joining me here. It's been absolutely fabulous to talk to you and learn more about your agency. And this is something that's going to be incredibly important going forward. Thanks again so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Gregory. I really appreciated the opportunity, and this was a lot of fun. So thank you.
I'm Gregory Sweet, and this is Skagit Talks.